Hey, and welcome back to the podcast. We are here with Thomas Smale, and Thomas is with feinternational.com. And if you're looking to earn a living from home or grow a business, then Thomas is your guy to talk to about different online business models like e-commerce, SaaS, content, and affiliates. And he can talk about looking to scale an online business and how he grew his company FE International to become an award-winning mergers and acquisitions advisor and so much more. So Thomas, glad to be talking to you.
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me on, Robert.
Yeah. So I looked at your website just now, and it's pretty cool talking about selling and buying websites. But if you are like the rest of us, you have so many ideas, so much going on. So what is your current focus and passion? What has you fired up these days?
Yeah, so I guess my responsibility is CEO of FE International, and I did also originally found the company in 2010, is continuing to grow the business we have now. I think like many entrepreneurs, I'm exactly the same as everyone else. I have lots of ideas as well, and I want to continuously be doing new things. But the fun thing about M&A or mergers and acquisitions is every single day we're working with a new business and new business owner. So we kind of live vicariously through what those businesses we're working with do. So we're always seeing new businesses, always meeting new founders, and the process of helping them sell their business means we learn a lot about other people's companies and like how they operate. So for me, there's never been a boring day or a day when I'm doing the same thing because we're always working on new businesses. So that's what kind of keeps me up and motivated every day and not getting bored like I know a lot of people do.
Yeah, it scratches the itch of having the short attention span when you're diving into a healthcare SaaS or you're driving into a company with a writing team or something like that. And it seems like this idea of buying and selling a website, it's kind of the dream, right? Because it's like all the pros of real estate with not a lot of the cons, because you can buy this website that's already making money. You can find like the missed opportunities and grow it and flip it. And there's so many possibilities. But out of all the possible things that we could be doing or should be doing, do you have a fun story or case study that kind of shows this mergers and acquisitions thing in action? Any kind of just fun anecdote to share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing if you compare it to real estate, I think you identify it very well. Like the biggest problem with real estate is if you buy almost anything, unless you're buying something from scratch and like building your own building from nothing, you can't fundamentally really increase how much you charge in rent. So increasing the income of any sort of real estate you buy is very difficult. Whereas for the business, you can make, in some cases, immediate changes overnight. So we saw a business recently that we sold, and the business was, so we sell all sorts of different businesses. The business was a plagiarism checker. So if you're writing content, whether you're a writer or a student or whatever, and you want to make sure that it doesn't have any plagiarism in there, you would use the tool that had a free element and a paid element. So as a potential user, you could do either. You've got a certain number of credits for free. The acquirer came in, acquired the business. It was a mid 7-figure deal. And the first thing they did, they made no changes at all to the business other than adding 2 higher priced pricing plans. So previously you could pay nothing, it was free, or you could pay $10 a month. And they changed it so you could also pay still free, $10 a month, $30 a month, or $100 a month if you essentially wanted more credits or to use the tool more. And within a month, they pretty much doubled the revenue of the business from new users coming in, literally just from the fact that you could now buy a higher price plan. So while that seems really stupid, what a lot of people think is you have to be like super genius or are really good at kind of web design or marketing or something like that to make improvements to businesses. But often you only have to make really small changes to make really big improvements. And things you might think will really improve a business won't actually make a difference at all. So design is a good example. Sometimes people look at like a bad design, which in most people's eyes is like a site that looks quite old and looks a bit out of date. and they think by making it look better or more modern that suddenly the business will make more money. But that's not necessarily the reality. Often people like simple things. Users get used to the way things are set up. So lots of other stories like that. But that was one example. I know I was looking at it recently because I was talking to the acquirer about 2 weeks ago, and they were telling me you could have come up with a list of 1,000 things to do with that business, but just by adding a couple of new pricing plans and changing what the options were for new users, they essentially doubled the income.
And I like that a lot, that when you're saying, well, I'm buying this web property and the scariest scenario is that it drops in value, that it goes to zero. And then a kind of bad scenario is if it stays the same, or like, breaks even, or it's not really making as much money as it could or should. And then the dream scenario is you buy it at this price and you see the missed opportunities ahead of time, and then you build it up and now it's worth way more in just a short amount of time because you've increased the monthly income. And that's a cool story, because what I get from that is that there's like you said, there's literally 1,000 things that you could do, fix up the website and make all these cosmetic changes. But you're saying, well, out of all the things you could do, what's the thing that has the biggest chance of making money, like having a higher ticket or a higher price point? And so how do we stumble across those kinds of solutions? Because there's even all these things that could have been tried to increase the money coming in. So how do we avoid that scary situation of saying, well, I'm going to put all this money into this website, this web property, and I'm going to try all these things. And the fear is that I spend 6 months on it or hire a team, and then it still drops in value. So how do we avoid that nightmare scenario?
Yeah, so I think fundamentally, the first thing you need to do is make sure you buy right. So if you buy the right kind of business and you operate it as the previous owner has been operating it, and you do that diligently, then if you buy the right kind of business, it shouldn't decline. Yes, there are externalities, there are things that could happen. There are cyclical things that might happen in particular businesses. But if you buy the right business to start with, then fundamentally it shouldn't decrease. So then, to your earlier point, the worst case scenario is the business doesn't grow, and then the best case scenario is any growth beyond that. So the number one thing is making sure you're secure in the first place. I'm not a real estate expert, but it'd be very similar to making sure if you're buying real estate and you want it to be steady, you only buy in kind of top tier cities where people are always going to be living. There's always population growth. So fundamentally, over time, the value of that land is probably not going to decrease. It's exactly the same with buying a good business. Yes, you may have to pay a relative premium to buy something that's steady and stable, but the worst case is you're still flat. And then identifying opportunities, ultimately, you don't really know. So you need to come up with a long list. You need to work through them. And to your point, you trial it. So the one good thing about kind of almost anything in business, particularly online business, you can test things, and if they don't work, you can change them back immediately. So that could be design. You can add new price tiers, and if they don't work, you can just change them back a day later. You're not making permanent damage by testing things. I would say, though, in not quite 100% of businesses, but in almost 100% of businesses, there are opportunities by improving pricing. It's something we see, regardless of what the business is, whether it's like you say, a content business, affiliate business, e-commerce business, SaaS business, there's always an opportunity there. And it's generally just increasing pricing. There are some exceptions, but I'd say in SaaS particularly, there's always an opportunity. There's always someone willing to pay more for the products you're selling in SaaS. And in the case of the example I gave you, it was literally just offering price tiers to people who wanted to buy at that price tier anyway, but previously they physically couldn't spend more than $10 a month, even if they wanted to. So they just got access to more credits. So often literally just adding higher price tiers is all you need to do. That doesn't necessarily mean you come in and double the price for every single existing user. That's not usually what you have to do at all. So yes, there's usually a long list. The great thing about business is no change you make is permanent. You can always change it back if you get worried about it. And to your point, if you test it, hopefully from that list of 1,000 things you come up with on day one, you only need one of them to work. If you try 999 things one works, that's still a great success. You don't have to have a 90% success rate or even a 1% success rate. You just need literally one thing to work. And as long as you're not losing value elsewhere, then you're fine. And the best thing about an online business, it's not like real estate. Let's say you have, I don't know, you have a 10 bedroom apartment that you own, and you could split that into kind of 4 units, or you could split it into 2 units, and it requires you doing a bunch of construction work. That's probably going to cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars and a bunch of time to test to see if you'll make more rent one way or the other. Whereas with an online business, almost nothing you do will require that much work to test. So I think that's why I personally like online businesses versus real estate, is because you can see those changes immediately. Almost nothing you want to do or test should cost you 6 figures. And if it doesn't work, you just change it back. Whereas if you do a bunch of construction work on a building, you can't really, in most cases, you can't easily change it back.
Right. It's not reversible. You can't just change those 4, like that, the 20 apartments back into 10 apartments, or if you split the rooms, like you can't undo that.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so that opens up, like you're saying, to having this kind of experiment mentality, so that if there's some sort of change in the business that you are kind of mulling over and saying, should I do it? Should I not do it? You're saying, well, just try it for a day, try it for, 7 days, 30 days, 60 days. And then if you don't like it, then you can revert back. And, you're making me think, Thomas, there's a monthly SaaS I use right now. That's kind of like one of those like AI transcription kind of platforms, right? Where you put in the audio, you get the text, and their price point is $13. And then I use up all my minutes. And they say, well, you can use this like team version that's like $30. And it's just such a mess. I ended up having to have 2 different $13 a month accounts. But if they had told me, here's a $50 or a $100 version, I'd pay it right away just to have the more credits. So yeah, there's even as a user, there are instances where I'm like, even the services I use, I wish there was like a slightly higher ticket option, and not necessarily with something crazy or more features or even like a discount, just more credits. So that way I can use what it is that I'm using. So this is some fun stuff to think about. And so is there something that you wish your average buyer, seller knew about this whole M&A thing? And not necessarily anything bad, but is there something that is just like not talked about enough in your space?
I think one of my pieces of advice to buyers, particularly first-time buyers, is a lot of people get really obsessed over the valuation they pay for a business. Obviously, my incentive, being completely clear, is we sell businesses, we get paid by the seller. The more the business sells for, the more we get paid. So it's in my incentive for the business to sell for as much as possible. But a lot of buyers get, I think, held up on kind of what's the correct valuation for a business. Like we have tons of data, we're very accurate with our valuations. But if you speak to 50 different buyers, they'll give you 50 different valuations for the same business. So ultimately, if you can get away from worrying about what the business is worth today and you worry more about what it's going to be worth once you make some changes, does it really matter? For example, if you buy a business for $10 million that was probably actually say worth 8 million, does it really matter if you pay 10 million for an $8 million business if you make a bunch of pricing changes that I just mentioned and you double the business within a month? So your business is then definitely worth more. It's definitely worth more than you just paid. So I'll say one thing I think a lot of buyers should think about, particularly first-time buyers, is it does matter to an extent what you pay on the way in, but it's much more important that you buy a good business than getting a good deal. Ultimately, good deals don't really exist. Like you're not going to be the only person who spotted a business that's being sold, particularly if it's through a good M&A firm. They're going to have a good network of buyers. Ultimately, you can make all of your money by the improvements you make, which is where it is a little bit different from real estate. Because my point with real estate, like you do have to pay the right amount on the way in, because in almost no apartment you buy can you suddenly increase rent by 50%. Yes, there's some exceptions, but it's quite uncommon. Like you're ultimately driven by market forces. Whereas for the business, there's no actual limit in the upside you can make. That's just one example. I was about 3 weeks ago, I was in Miami with a bunch of our VIP clients talking to someone who had acquired a business about a year ago. He had bought a business that was a multi-million dollar business, but it was not huge. And he's about 10x the business in a year, primarily from some pricing changes, like on Avoid, what you mentioned as an ongoing trend. Also from some like design related changes and other operational changes within the business. And I remember when he was buying that business, he probably realized he was slightly overpaying based on what the business is worth now, but he had an amazing plan to grow the business. So he didn't really care if he was paying a little bit more. But this guy's very experienced. He runs a mid 8-figure a year revenue business. So he understood that it doesn't really matter what you pay on the way in, as long as you have a good plan to grow it. Whereas buyers, first-time buyers, often obsess over entry multiple, and they might have you can read 100 different articles about business valuation, and to my point, they will all say slightly different things. So there's never a right or wrong answer. Ultimately, to just buy a business that you think is good and you think you know how to grow it, and then actually implement that plan, and then it doesn't really matter what you paid in the first place.
Yeah, and this is awesome. You're reminding me that a bunch of years ago, I had this friend that bought a house, and then he told me he was remodeling his house. And I thought, oh, are you like knocking down walls, or are you moving the kitchen? And it turned out that remodeling to him meant putting a fresh coat of paint and like changing out the doorknobs. And I was saying, that's great, and that'll help you sell your home faster, but that's not going to increase the value of your home. Like if like there are different set of rules. Like if someone down the street sells their house for a huge amount, then your price will go up. And if someone in the neighborhood sells for a low price, your price will go down, but you don't have a lot of control over that. And so what you're saying here is that because it's a money-making business, then the value can change quite a bit, just depending on these changes that you make. So because there's this huge upside, because it's not so locked in the way real estate is, then it's okay if you pay slightly more or slightly not what you want as far as acquiring this business, because you can do all these things that that make things work. And you hear about all these really cool stories where someone buys a business and it's already making money, or it comes with employees, or sometimes the founder can like hang on afterwards for like a few months or a year to get things up and running. And so with all these possibilities, with all these things that could be done, like you said, all these different opinions, all these different methods, why don't more people pursue this? What holds people back? Is it a matter of like having the investment, or is it like too scary, too many unknowns? Why is this not more mainstream?
So I think firstly, it's only becoming more mainstream. 12 years ago in 2010, when I started, it was not very mainstream at all. If I wanted to come on your podcast or any other podcast, you'd be like, who's this guy? Why is anyone like buying and selling online businesses? That's not really a thing. So today it is a lot more mainstream than it was, but it's definitely nothing like the real estate industry. I don't know what the stat is, but if you speak to the average American, the average millionaire American owns real estate. They might not necessarily make their money from real estate, but they own real estate. How many of them like own a business they've acquired? A much, much lower percentage. I think the fundamental thing that's holding back more people from getting into the space is financing, because currently traditional banks will generally not lend money to buy an online business. They will lend against some businesses, but definitely not all of them. Whereas if you're buying real estate, yes, some deals are happening in cash, but the majority of the time, if you're a wannabe investor and you have $20,000 or $50,000, you can go to a bank, get a loan, and buy a property for 200,000, 300,000, 500,000, whatever that might be, and build your portfolio from there. Whereas fundamentally, if you want to buy a business, particularly in the online space, generally you need to have cash. So the example I was giving, yes, they had doubled the value of the business they acquired within a month, but they had to have mid 7 figures in cash available to do that acquisition in the first place. So the barrier to entry is quite high if you're buying at that level. I started out with nothing. I had $100 and I started out buying really small websites, selling them for a little bit more, and then kind of compounding from there. And then eventually launched a M&A service where I would do it for people. But I think a lot of people are just ultimately impatient. There's lots of things you can do for less money to get started rather than saving up to buy a business. So I guess the entry point is, particularly for, I say, what I would describe as like a good business. We don't generally sell $20,000 businesses because, firstly, the economics don't really work for us to offer that as a service. But secondly, at that level, you're generally not buying a good business. It's probably very reliant on the seller and has various other issues. You need to generally have at least six figures to invest until you can buy something that's, I guess, what we would consider a business. So some of the things I've spoken about, like improving pricing and buying a business that's fundamentally good in the first place, much harder to find that at the $20,000 level. It gets easier as you go up market. So yeah, my belief is in the next 10 years, when banks, if you go to a bank and you want to buy a restaurant, which objectively are generally not very good businesses, they go out of business at a very high rate. All sorts of offline businesses you can acquire. You can go to a bank and they'll lend you money to buy that business. Whereas if you want to buy an online business, that's not the case. But if you look at the success rate for people buying SaaS companies and the success rate for people buying restaurants, again, I don't have that exact statistic to hand, but I think it's something like 95% of restaurants go out of business within 3 years. That's definitely not the case with profitable SaaS businesses. Yes, to your point, worst case scenario is it might not grow, but it's not going to zero and it's not going bankrupt. So I think if we have the same conversation in 10 years' time, it will be more mainstream, but that does rely a little bit on banks to kind of catch up, which they're beginning to do. This conversation today versus say 3 years ago or 5 years ago, we have far more buyers today who have external financing they have access to, but it's still a uphill struggle with banks to get them on board.
And that must mean there's got to be some kind of opportunity there, right? As far as it kind of keeps other people out. Like you might think that, okay, well, it's not really recognized by banks. They'd rather give you a loan for a restaurant that's almost guaranteed to fill versus this website. But you have to imagine that when someone goes to a marketplace such as yours and they see all these websites for sale, like sure, there's competition. There are people looking at these, but definitely not as many people looking at these websites as there might be people like out trying to outbid you for some other kind of brick and mortar business. So that could be good if we look at it in the right perspective, right? In that, okay, well, someone else is unable to get some kind of loan to get this business, but if we can figure out some way to make it work financially, then we can make it happen. And so this is such an exciting topic, and there's so many possibilities, especially if one sets their ego aside and says, I don't need to build up that healthcare SaaS from scratch if it already exists, if it already has all of the bugs figured out, or a lot of them, it already has an established user base. Why would I spend 5 or 10 years hiring all these programmers to make something from scratch if something already exists? And so that seems like kind of an important aspect. And then, as you said, once you get above 6 figures, then a lot of things change. Then now you're buying a business that has been established, that's not depending on the founder, that has cash flow coming in. And so this is such an exciting thing for us to look into. And as you said, in even just the next couple of years, it will have advanced as far, if not further, than it has the last few years, where even a few years ago, talking about this was kind of something new and unknown. And so this is something that we need to pay attention to and jump on. So if someone is watching or listening our podcast episode here, Thomas, and they say, I'm excited, but I need to know more to take action, what's the next step here? Do they go to your website? Do they arrange a call? How does someone do the next thing that they need to do as far as jumping on this M&A train?
Yeah, exactly. So you've outlined it exactly. I think your summary was really good. But if you go to the feinternational.com website, have a browse of businesses we're currently representing. It's all anonymous, so you only get high level information about the business. You can then click a button to inquire. Someone in my team will reach out, establish why you're interested. You can explain why you're looking. But my number one advice to people starting out is spend time browsing lots of different businesses. You definitely should not buy the first business you look at. But if you're still looking at business number 1,000 and you haven't bought one, then the issue is probably more psychological rather than anything else, because you're never going to find, almost definitely not going to find the perfect business. You just have to find something that's a good fit. So to start out, just start browsing. There are other M&A firms you can look at as well. You shouldn't just be looking with us, but have a look, speak to whoever the person is in my team about what you're looking to buy. And then ultimately our job is to sell you a business. So they will find you businesses that are a fit if the first one you look at is not something that's what you're looking for.
And there's been so much good like business advice and life advice snuck into this conversation we're having. And this is good advice in general. Just if there's something that you know that you want to do in your business, in your life, in your career at some point in the future, don't just leave it as a mystical, unknown black cloud. Right? If you know that at some point you're going to be buying and selling businesses, then start doing what Thomas says here and just start browsing. So that way you won't know what you're looking at first, but the more you look at this listing and that listing, then you'll start to get an idea of what's good for you and what's not, and what you like and what you don't like. It's kind of along the same lines of thinking of, if you've always wanted to go to college, don't just leave it a dream. Look into actual colleges and research like where you'd go and what the campuses look like and what kind of degree you might get. If you've always had some sort of a dream car, don't just say, well, one day I want to have a red Ferrari. Look into the possible cars you could get and makes and models and reviews and years and price points. So that way this dream can begin to come together and you can begin having these possibilities, these options, these likes and dislikes. And the same holds true for going to feinternational.com. Go there now and browse the listings. And as Thomas said, find one that you like. And then once you find one that you say, okay, well, this is something that I want to know more about, then click that more details button next to the listing. That way, Thomas and someone from his team can talk to you and you can explain why this looks like an appealing option for you. And you can begin to have that conversation, even if you're not quite ready to have it right now. But like in the same way that we're talking here, maybe someday you want to buy a house, but you meet with the realtor ahead of time, just so that way you have a person already. And that way they can tell you what you need to know to get on the path to where you want to go. So as we are wrapping up our conversation here, Thomas, and people are going to feinternational.com, do you have any final parting words of advice, anything to say to wrap this all up?
No, I think that's a really good summary. Like ultimately, you just have to get started. You can listen to me talking all day long, but ultimately, we're not the ones that are going to buy a business for you. So start looking. There's lots of people out there incentivized to help you buy a business, very similar to real estate. Start looking. What's a good fit for me is not going to be a good fit for you, and what's a good fit for you is not going to be a good fit for me. So there's no right or wrong answer. So you ultimately just have to start the search.
I love it. Great advice. Start the search, and the search begins at feinternational.com. Go there now while it's so fresh on your mind, and we'll see you there at feinternational.com. And thank you, Thomas, for stopping by.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. Appreciate it.